Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar, Learning's New Frontier, Putting Learners in the Driver's Seat. I am David Wentworth. I am Principal Learning Analyst here at Brandon Hall Group, and I am joined by Amit Gautam. He is the CEO and one of the founders of UpsideLMS. Amit is a learning technology enthusiast and a passionate leader, an IIM and NIT alumnus. Amit is the key idea generator for UpsideLMS's product team, a sales and marketing orchestrator, a learning technology solutions consultant for clients and prospects, and a mentor for all the function heads at his company. So welcome, Amit. And I would also like to extend a, let's see why that isn't. I want to make sure the slides are actually moving here. There we go. I'd like to extend a thank you to UpsideLMS for sponsoring today's webinar. A winner of 50+ industry awards and recognition, UpsideLMS is a full-featured cloud-based learning management system. Its SaaS architecture brings you advantages of speed, scalability, innovation, lower total cost of ownership, and higher ROI, while its comprehensive feature set makes the management of your online, formal, social and informal, and mobile learning through responsive learner side and mobile apps easy and efficient. This industry agnostic LMS is trusted by over 175 clients and 2.5 million plus learners worldwide. And for those of you who might not be familiar with Brandon Hall Group, Brandon Hall Group is a research and analyst firm that empowers excellence in organizations around the world through our research and tools. Quick mention that our Excellence Awards Spring program is now open for submissions. We've added a lot of categories, about a dozen different ones across different program areas, so be sure to visit the website for the latest on that. And your participation in our surveys is probably one of the most crucial components of our research. If you see any surveys on our schedule that you would like to participate in, that would be great. All participants receive a piece of complimentary research once the results are analyzed. And you can also visit our website and click Open Surveys for the latest list. And finally, a few logistics on the webinar itself. The presentation is being recorded, and the recording and the slides will be provided to everyone within 24 hours in a follow-up email. If you would like to ask a question, please do so by typing it into the question box, and we'll be keeping an eye on that throughout. Feel free to ask questions during. We'll try to get to relevant questions in real time. We'll also save some time at the end to answer any new questions that might have come in or anything that we might have missed. You can also use that just to share any thoughts or insights you might have as well. That's the way you're going to communicate with us, is that question box, so get familiar with that. And also, if you'd like to download a copy of the presentation instantly, you can find it in your handouts section. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. We'll just dive into some of the content that Amit and I will be talking about today. So, you know, we talk about this, putting learners in the driver's seat. So what do we mean by that? What are we really talking about? What are we after? So you can take a very generalized definition of what learner autonomy is, and that's learners taking control and responsibility for their own learning, both in terms of what they learn and how they learn it, and using their own self-direction and self-discipline to take a proactive approach to their learning. So Amit, I'd invite you to sort of just say hi to everybody and come in and discuss a little bit about your thoughts around what is learner autonomy.
Thank you, David. Thank you for the warm welcome. And hello, everyone. I hope this is a good session for all of us. And as David did describe my role, yes, I have been in the LMS and the e-learning business for about 2 decades now. So I hope I could add some value to your time today. So David, when it comes to learner autonomy, I think you have mentioned one key point there, which is responsibility for their own learning. I think the second parallel and the balancing point for that would be the accountability for the learners. So when you have a responsibility to learn, there's also an accountability which is passed to the learners, where they don't just can learn, but they also make sure that they are able to learn to improve the performance of themselves and the team around them. So I would say the missing piece in this would be that along with responsibility, they also get a lot of accountability to do that, which then in turn becomes their motivation. It could be linked to their current work, it could be linked to their aspirations for a new role, but that accountability has to come in along with the responsibility. But yes, I think the own learning, control of the learning, self-direction and discipline, that's really important here.
Right, and clearly this is not an abdication of the organization saying it and its responsibilities, right? Saying we're not going to drive this at all. It's all up to the learner. That's clearly not what either of us are after here. And what I think is interesting about the idea of learner autonomy, especially as we see it here, is it's very much aligned with and intertwined with the work that we're doing. What we see is happening in learning is this idea of personalized learning and learning at scale. And when we think about the personalization of learning here at Brandon Hall Group, we often make sure that organizations who are thinking about this and moving forward with it think about it in a couple of ways. One, it's both the personalization of the learning itself so that it's relevant to the learner and their strengths, weaknesses, their goals, their career, right? There's that level of it, but then there's also that the learning can be accessed or interacted with when and where and how makes the most sense for the learner. So there's that level of personalization, and those two things together are also what's going to help drive the autonomy, right? Without that personalization on both points, it's harder to have that autonomy because you're not giving the learners the tools to be able to do the things that we might be asking them to do. So we'll dig a little bit into the personalization, but one of the things we found in our recent study on upskilling and reskilling, we were digging into the concept of delivering personalized learning at scale. And we did find that when we asked what needs to happen in order for the organization to effectively scale their learning, be able to deliver it to a large organization or across the globe or widely dispersed, whatever it may be, in order to scale learning, what are some of the things you need? And 91% of companies agreed that making sure that learners have more ownership and accountability for their learning is a key element in scaling learning. And that's true. The giving more control and responsibility to the learners themselves is going to help an organization deliver the kind of learning experience that they are on a much bigger scale, and be able to adapt quicker as things change. And so, speaking of change, obviously we've been through an awful lot of change recently. I don't think we need to really go over that in too much detail. I think everyone's very well aware of what's happening from that standpoint. But this is, there were these expectations of today's learners had been changing prior to this anyway, right? I mean, Amit, you've seen this too. This is nothing new that just happened in the last year, although everything's been accelerated greatly. But we have been seeing for a while now that the expectations learners have of what they want from their learning experience have been changing quite a bit. And so one of the things I wanted to use to illustrate that is some of our research around what goes into the learning experience. And I've separated out, and you'll see, we'll focus on what we call high impact learning versus low impact. And so in that data, when you see something that says high impact, this is what I'm referring to. In our research, we asked organizations, does your learning approach positively affect the following outcomes? How effective is it? And it's things like time to productivity, voluntary turnover, employee engagement, right? Not just learner engagement, but overall employee engagement. So you see these items listed here. So the companies that said, yes, our learning approach, whatever that may be, our learning approach is having a strong positive impact on those outcomes. We took those companies and put them together, called them high impact. And then we looked at the others, would be lower impact, and see if there were any differences. And one thing we found is in that learner experience, when we look at some of the things that would allow there to be more autonomy, more personalization in the learning experience, we see that these high impact companies are likely to have those things in place. So the ability for the learner to go ahead and search and explore and discover learning opportunities on their own, more likely to do that. More likely to provide learning recommendations to the learner so that they can continue to explore based on what they've been doing and what they're already working on. A personalized learning plan that they can track, they can follow their own progress. Almost twice as likely to provide that at these high impact learning organizations. Giving the learner an introduction on how programs will be delivered so they know up front what's expected of them, how it's going to go, so they can plan around that. Big one here, and a huge gap between the two groups, giving the learners that link between the learning and their own personal objectives. Here's what you're going to get out of it. Here's how this lines up with where, what you're doing in the organization and where you're headed, and as well as in general, the goals and outcomes that are expected of the program, letting learners know, here's what we expect to happen from a knowledge standpoint, from a skill standpoint, from a behavior standpoint. This is what, the future end state looks like. And that, again, empowers the learner to understand, okay, I am at, A, that is B, and I need to get from A to B. And they're able to sort of plot out that plan. So when you look at some of these things, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the other shifts that you've seen, but anything on this that comes to mind that you wanted to sort of highlight?
In fact, this does correlate very strongly to what we have been observing in the field. When we talk to our customers and what they and as you said rightly, it's not just the last 1.5 to 2 years. It's not a pandemic-driven only shift. This is what at least I've been observing for the last at least 5 years now. And I think in some ways the advent of mobile devices and the technology embedding much more deeply into the workflows of every employee. Even if it's a non-technology company, the technology is now becoming more pervasive and more relevant to the functioning of the business. So I think ever since that, and I think the last 5 to 6 years also, a lot has changed in terms of the business environment. Today, businesses need to do a lot more with less people. They need to skill and upskill very frequently. And those changes have also, and also, our observations also correlate very strongly to these pointers where we're able to see that customers who are very strongly believing in learning as a tool, a very strong tool to empower their employees, they will always tend to go towards high impact learning. And they would also because it's no more a function of just delivering training and just sitting back and enjoying the view. It's actually making sure the learners are into the overall system. So I think the simple things like introduction to the programs to be delivered, it seems very trivial, but just to make a learner feel involved in the process, that I know what is going to happen with me in the next 2 hours or 3 hours or 2 days or 10 days, that does make a big impact on the way they motivate themselves to learn. And I think the objectives and alignment with the learning, whatever the material is, that also is becoming stronger, because employees, they don't really have a lot of time, and they don't want to do a lot of training which doesn't go well with their own plans in the companies. If I want to become a salesperson or a accounts manager or an enterprise accounts manager, I don't want to spend my time learning basics of negotiation for 10 hours. So there has to be an alignment between the objectives and the tools we are using to deliver learning. So I would say, of course, your survey has a lot of reach and you have done a lot of people who have responded, but that is also what we see on the ground when we talk to the teams who are actually managing the delivery of learning functions. So
Yeah.
it does go well with what, and I think pandemic has just sped up everything faster and made it more urgent, but these changes have been taking place gradually for the last many years now.
Yeah, and what's interesting is you mentioned how it seems simple, like the link between learning and personal objectives, or the introduction to how the program will be delivered. It seems like a simple thing, but so often the learning leaders, they get concerned about learner engagement. They want adoption, they want people to be engaged in learning, and they start thinking about it of, well, the content itself has to be engaging. We have to use the right colors and imagery and things, but here are all these things that can build up that engagement before the content is even opened. Before they spend 1 second interacting with the learning, you've already built up this level of engagement because, oh, I get how this works for me. I get what this means for me. And I have that alignment. And suddenly they're all bought in. And all the little things that you can do from a content perspective are more just sort of nice to haves and icing on the cake, if you will. But the idea is to build that engagement with some what seem like relatively simple or common sense things that we could do. As I shift to the next slide, and we have some item on here that I'll have you talk to, but I think it's interesting that some of this, Amit, that you've got listed here, we can talk about these because it addresses one of the things that Salde has said, one of our attendees, and this is the comment, just saying that another side of learner autonomy is removing the current disconnect between learning and working. So we've been talking about that, right? Learning in the flow of work. Back to the quote, providing bite-sized digital content that I can consume during my day at the time of need in my preferred modality or format, has to be of higher value than making me take time away from my work, away from my peers, outside my discussions to attend a classroom. So yes, Solveig, this is exactly what we're after here and what we're digging into, and you're basically verbalizing those changing expectations that we're talking about, right? Is that idea that not only do learners want this from their learning, they want it to feel more part of their work and less like a distraction or something that pulls them away. But that's what the organization wants as well, right? The idea of let's give people the learning that they need when they need it. We want learning to be seen as a tool for me to do my job better, not as this thing I need to step away to take care of before I can continue to do my job, correct?
And absolutely, absolutely. In fact, what we have seen is the learners, they are increasingly having less and less time to step away from the work and learn something. So learning has to now become a part of the process. So it has to be almost like a search and learn. So it's like, if I'm doing something and I don't know how to do that, and this is actually more of a reality now, which is not the right case, but a lot of people start a new job or a new task without the full understanding of how that is to be done. They have some basic understanding and they start the task, and then they want to learn as they go along. They don't have the time to spend a few hours to figure out everything. Of course, if it is a high risk and a critical function, yes, there is safety involved. Things are done in a different manner, but in a normal workflow, a lot of people, they start a function or a task without everything in their head and how to do that. So they improvise and they learn along the way, and that's where the need for shorter pieces of content, the need for the learning within the flow of work, where they don't have to go out to a classroom, spend a day, and then come back and do something of that sort. So I think these all things are linked to each other. But yes, I think what we have seen is there is the learners are becoming more vocal about what they need. They're actually giving good feedback about their experience. So content itself is becoming a smaller piece of the puzzle. What the learners are after now is it overall helping me in my goal? So the experience, what other than the content is the system, or is the learning tool giving me? Can I connect to my peers? Can I ask some experts? Can I connect to a mentor to help me with my real life problems? So I think the overall experience around and the content is now a small piece, because content is becoming more and more, I would say, available. You could almost search anything on net today and find almost, right from a manual of how to do something to even a complex process or a knowledge piece. So I think that is becoming more and more, I wouldn't say trivial, but more relevant, more available easily. So the experience, what else am I getting from the system? Does it really help me do my job better? That's what I think learners are driving after. And so, the mobile devices, shorter formats, search and learn, and actually on demand, like a service. When I need, I want, only then I need to access that piece of content. So I think these are all things are linked to each other. The last one is where it actually becomes a piece of the experience, where can the system proactively go ahead and say, okay, what, you've done this, and I think I know what you're doing in your work, so I recommend these things to you, and also your team members are doing these things, or given the role and the skills you need to acquire or you already have, you should look at these few pieces of content or learning journeys to help you with. So that I think is becoming very strong now, where the tools or the systems we use, they are able to proactively recommend that, okay, you've done this, now focus on this for the next 2 days. This will help you, because maybe there is a, the systems are able to detect the behavior and the pattern of what you're working on. That I think is becoming much stronger now. And as systems evolve, they will also know a lot about, learn a lot about learners. They will, the recommendations, the personalization will actually become much stronger. But yes,
Yeah.
I think it all kind of is like a cycle. It's like all in single loop. One leads to another, and then the other leads to back to the one.
Yeah, and I think you're so right about that point of it gets better over time. I think organizations need to be realistic about this stuff, that it's, while there's a lot of really interesting things that can happen from a technology standpoint right away, it's really about what happens over time, right? This is all about learning and adapting, and the systems understanding what's going on, and that only comes with over time. It also involves some work from the organization to understand what kind of data they have, what's good, what isn't, because any of these systems that use data to understand and to make recommendations or decisions, they're only as smart as we allow them to be. But as Amit, you're saying, I mean, I think everyone's very used to in their daily lives this kind of experience. They don't even think twice about it, really. They're not even conscious that that's the kind of experience that they're getting, that it's very tailored to them. If you search for something on your phone, you're going to get results that are relevant to where you are, relevant to things that you've looked for before. And, of course, and there's issues around privacy that I think some companies have struggled with in the past, but I think what we're seeing is there's plenty of information that we can know about learners that we can put into this to understand better how to do all of these things. So yeah, the interesting thing about all of these, like I said, is these are not things that just popped up last week, last month. These are things that companies have been picking up for a while, but there's no ignoring the fact that we've been through something quite dramatic over the last 18 months or so. And the one thing I keep saying on the webinars and when I talk to organizations about this is that the one thing I will say for this pandemic is it's really forced organizations to put into action things they may have been thinking about for months or years. Thinking like, well, we'll get to it. We're thinking we've got a plan, we're researching it. And then suddenly it was, we have to do something now because, instructor-led training in person off the table. What are we going to do instead? And it can't be a short-term solution. There's some sort of long-term solution we need, because even when things get back to whatever normal may be, we're still going to be dealing with some bit of a hybrid workforce. And at the end of the day, these things that we are talking about, this autonomy, this personalization, these are not solutions for a remote workforce only, right? These are solutions that work in general because of why they work, how they're effective, the fitting into the way people's work lives are. So, we can't take this moment, start to leverage these technologies only in a pandemic mindset. The mindset is these are things that we're going to continue to do. That's not to say, and I think you would agree with me, that there will be a return to the classroom, right? And I don't doubt that. I think there should be. I think although we may do it differently, companies may think a little bit more about what takes place in person now that we have all these opportunities to do so much more in a virtual digital way. But there's no denying that the pandemic had a huge impact on things. And, we saw it in our research. We asked, we do a benchmarking study every year asking companies how much or how little this and that. And when we look at tools and modalities, we ask, okay, how much do you use these? But we had a question this year of, hey, how has the pandemic impacted your use of the following modalities? And listen, we've been doing this for close to a decade. ILT, in-person ILT, is always number one, has always been the number one modality by far that overall organizations use. Suddenly, literally, the one year, it's now, you can see the vast majority of companies say our use of it has decreased 20% or more, which in reality is probably down to 0% because they couldn't have people in place. But then what you see is you start to see a more growth in a wider variety of tools. It wasn't just, in the immediate aftermath, there was this move to just replace it with a virtual classroom, right? And I think you probably saw that among your clients and the companies you talk to, Amit, that, okay, if we can't be in person, we'll just do it online. We'll take a Zoom or a GoToMeeting just like this, and we'll have the class. And pretty soon, everyone realized that wasn't going to work because the content doesn't work in that environment. It's made to be in person. Your instructor might not have virtual instructor skills or facilitator skills. And it's a big surprise to a lot of them that they're a different set of skills. And so then it was like, okay, what do we do? What's the plan? And it turns out that their approach now is a wider variety of tools and technologies to meet specific needs in different areas and to spread that out in the approach. But you can see here all of the different things, and obviously virtual synchronous classrooms, recorded webinars, those are the big ones. E-learning modules, a lot more of that being used, but we're starting to see more around mobile, micro learning, online performance support, the things we're talking about. But just if you want to share any thoughts that you've had, like speaking to clients as this pandemic has rolled on, and what are they coming to you for? Like, what are their thoughts on what they want to do?
I think, see, a couple of things you mentioned, they were like really spot on. And in terms of ILT or the in-person classroom, there's an interesting observation we have been having in the last many months. Is that, and I think, as you said, they will be returned to classroom. But we also know from our discussions that it may not be as it used to be, or even close to that. Because what is going to happen is that even the instructors who are now, kind of looking to a remote environment, we may not have as many instructors available to be available in the classrooms. So eventually a lot of kind of push is going to be through tools which are able to support remote working, not for the employees but also for the instructors, because a lot of people have entirely changed the way they learn and train in the last 18 months or so. A lot of training has moved online in some form or the other. Even the trainers are getting used to that environment because it saves them time. They can do more with their time. So they, I think there will be a lot of push from the trainers also to not do a lot of classroom training again. One, the pandemic is over, but may not be over. People are now very, very cautiously optimistic about what is going to happen in the future. So they do not want to enter a situation again where they have to redo everything because they were not prepared. So I think they're going to be really very cautious about resuming a lot of things because in a single day, if you have to have training for let's say 10 people, then you need to have those 10 people in the office or in the training room or in that area where, and that is maybe a challenge because if half of your people have become fully remote, it may not be a possibility at all. So I think so. Yes, there was a kind of an increase or spike in moving everything to like a virtual classroom because it was the only option people had and the content was ready in some form. But yes, it is a very short-term measure. As simple as things like Zoom fatigue or all the trainees are not able to put their cameras on. At the same time, that itself is becoming a huge challenge to run that effectively. So it's not if I'm not able to see the participants, it is very difficult to engage with the participants. And people have genuine challenges in putting the cameras on. They are in an environment they may not be able to put the cameras on all the time. So I think so, but yes, I think the other factors are becoming very prominent. So and this is also a very big push where learner autonomy is now being sought very heavily by the companies themselves, not just by the learners. So now companies are trying to make learners more accountable for what they learn. So they are saying, okay, we have everything available, this content available. We have a lot of people you can talk to. So this is what you need to do. So you go ahead and do that, and we will help you with micro learning, the right tools, all the environment. It is full-time access. So there are a lot of things which companies are doing right now. But I totally agree with the results because that's what is really happening on the ground.
Yeah. And I think you can't discount or this idea of Zoom fatigue. And I think sometimes people say it and it's sort of almost a joke. It's kind of funny and something that everyone that has been through recently. But the reality of it is going to have a huge impact, because if you think back before this, the idea of a virtual classroom was maybe somewhat unique, and it was and maybe engaging just by its own existence in that, oh, we're trying this new thing. Now the learning function has to realize I'm dealing with an audience that probably actively dislikes this format now, right? Would give anything to not join another Zoom-based or other kind of virtual meeting. So what are we going to do instead? So that's sort of been taken away from the learning function as they're a unique tool to them. Now people are on it all the time. So, okay, what are we going to do about that? And then, as you were mentioning, Amit, we've seen in our research, we've asked companies what's going to happen. I think what we saw is, as far as going from remote work to back into the workplace, I think initially the idea was like everyone's just going to stay remote. And then I think as time wore on, we realized, no, people are going to come back to the office because they want to, because their organization wants them to, but not everybody. And there will be more remote workers in the future than there were in the past. That's just it. There's, you can't put that toothpaste back in the tube. That's what's happening. And that creates this whole new scenario, like you were talking about, the idea of scheduling, trying to figure this out. Even if you've got this return to work strategy in place and you've got these people in the office and these people are remote, there are going to be people that are both. So they come in a few days a week, maybe not even the same days. So you're dealing with that. How do we fit learning around that kind of environment? And this idea that people working remotely, their flow of work, you have no idea what that is anymore, right? It could be different chunks of any 24-hour period that this person might be working at their best. And so when you say, oh, I'm going to make learning that fits in the flow of work, well, what is that? And so having a better understanding of what the flow of work is now is very critical. It is not what we thought it was in the past. And this is a time where, if you want to be able to give people autonomy, of course, a remote environment is a great time to do that. But getting managers and supervisors, that layer involved in this process is a big key to that, because they're going to have more insight into how their teams are operating, who's doing what, when, and how the learning actually does fit into those workflows. And learning is not going to necessarily have that insight. So it's important to get that and really understand what kind of environment that you're working in. And that's the thing, everyone's is going to be slightly different. Yeah, and so talk a little bit more about some of the shift towards some of the different delivery methods that we're seeing.
Sure. So, and I think just to add to your last point, and so in addition to the content and the experience, the third factor towards personalization of learning is the flow of work, because as you said rightly, that everybody is going to have a different flow of work right now. So when you're in office all together, there's like a general, with some variance, there is general kind of alignment of schedules, alignment of work timings. But when you're not in the same place, even in different areas, so that also will be a factor in how you personalize the learning. As simple as leaving having an automated chatbot in the system where people can interact with, or they can ask questions which they normally ask a mentor or a coach, and it can answer back those at that point in time. So even if it's late in the night, everybody else is not available, but the chatbot is available. So it might be, so that the overall process has to be redesigned. It is not just about content designed in a let's say a better way. It is actually the whole ecosystem around the learner which has to be redesigned, redefined. So in terms of, and that actually leads us to the delivery methods which are now going to change. And so one thing is, of course, because of the pandemic, there is a sudden and a massive shift. One day we are in office, and the other day for the next 18 months we're not in office, and that was not expected, that was not planned. So the companies had to struggle to survive and adapt to that environment. So everything became digital first. From simple tasks. Today we even sign documents electronically, which was available for the last decade. There have been services available for the last decade, but we never used them. It was only for very, very special situations, maybe where you are not in the same geography. Even then, we used to FedEx it better than sign electronically. But that sudden movement, as simple as that, is what we are experiencing even in the learning domain. Like from ILT to virtual classroom. Now that itself is becoming a kind of a discussion point. Is it really effective anymore? Is it adding to fatigue of people? So that will lead to maybe more micro learning, or maybe more on-demand learning. Then from reading content to more videos, and from pushing content to more self-paced learning. That's what we are seeing as shift in how learners are expecting the learning to reach them. And of course, while these are induced by the pandemic, but at least my opinion, they are now more or less irreversible. We cannot ever go back to what we were about 18 months back. It is not possible. The situation will not allow for that. So it's in fact, and what we are in today is a better situation from a learning perspective. If you're able to empower learners more, I think that makes a learning experience much more effective, and also more accountability in the entire process. So that's there. And as I said, the experience which has to be personalized also means, can we now offer differentiated learning to each individual? Some learners may be better off with videos. Some may actually still feel that a Zoom call or a session is much better for them, because they engage with the trainers and the participants much more than others. So, and some might want to do it on mobile devices. Some might want to do it on bigger devices. So I think all of these factors together is what we are seeing would drive our next change of evolution, in terms of how do we adapt to these varied, different, and diverse methods of delivery, yet without losing the the effectiveness of the program. So we can also, one way is to design multiple programs, but that is a different challenge. How do you maintain the consistency of the programs? So I think there are a lot of things which are going to happen in the next few years. And I think as of now, we are all good because we are still coming out of the situation. So we are all adjusting to each other's situations. But once we are settled into the new normal, the expectations will certainly become much more stronger from the learners. They won't, any longer just accommodate the fact, okay, we had a pandemic, but because their work is going to be affected if they don't learn better. So they will start demanding things more strongly. So I think the next 2 to 3 years, maybe 5 years, are going to be really, really interesting to see how the learning, people like us, systems, or people who design learning interventions or learning interactions, how do they adapt to these situations? So I think the coming 2 3 years, even 5 years, is going to be really, really challenging for us.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And like, I said, I don't think, this by any means is the death of in-person classroom training by any means. And I think, though, like I said, it'll hopefully look different and won't be just looked at as the standard way of doing things or a given. And organizations will put more thought into, okay, if we are going to ask people to come together and be together in person, which, I'm sorry, but regardless of whatever technology exists, we can't yet replace that sense of being together in a room with people and collaborating, working together. So I think, there is that. And so that will continue to be a key element. But let's really take advantage of that environment and bringing people together and not waste people's times with things that they can do in other formats. And so, whatever we can deliver from pre-work or pre-reading or previewing, so that everyone, when they do arrive and they are meeting in person, everyone's sort of on the same page, knows what the plan is, has all the right information, and then using other bits of technology to keep people connected during in-person events, and then obviously collaborating and continuing on after. So, this isn't the idea that, oh, we'll never be in classroom again. It's just, I think we should need to leverage the tools that we have available to make that classroom experience even better and more impactful. So I'm at a couple of questions that just came in that I was, some there, and there are plenty. I think there are some that are good for the end where we'll have more of a discussion. But since we're sort of on this, what are your thoughts? Like, this is a pretty general question, but what are your thoughts? And Sakadev is asking you directly. What are your thoughts on a way forward in like the percentage of virtual versus classroom? What are your thoughts on that?
So I would say, that is a different kind of a percentage to look at. So if I would say, if we were doing 100% ILTs or classrooms for whatever programs we were doing, I think that would come to about maybe 20% now. But as you said just a while back, is that also has to be now interspersed with a lot of technology before and after the program. So, let's say if we were doing 2 hours of program in a classroom, it might only now remain about half an hour in the classroom in any point in the time. But the rest has to be still delivered through other mediums, other media, or other forms of training. So that is what, I'll give an example, and this is a very like a different domain, but says a lot about what we can expect. Is that, my daughter's school, when things were a little better in between, they had opened for a while. So what they were doing is they were not doing any teaching in the school. So they will send all the material home. They will do online classes, but they will only do small collaborative project work in school and assessments in school, just to create that sense of being with each other. And they're students, they're young people. They need to connect more, at this stage. But they still had this thinking that we will not teach them in the school. We will just bring them together and let them do some collaboration work or some project work or some task or some assessments here. So I think that might be a kind of an example of what it could look like for the corporate learning also. Where you do your learning bit, wherever you want to do, but when you come to a classroom environment, it is more about collaboration or doing some exercises together, or you do some assessments together, so that it kind of reinforces your learning. It also creates a sense of belonging and bonding with other people, but yet it leaves you to your own way of learning, which is, I think, a great mix of what it could look like.
Yeah, No, I appreciate that answer. Thank you very much. And to build on a little bit of what you've got here on the right side, under like the idea of how mobile devices play into all of this, and you see things in there like chatbot-driven learning, AI-driven chatbots, and I think when we talk about learner autonomy, I think that's going to play a much bigger role than it has in the past, because what those kind of tools allow you to do is to sort of hands off, let the learner go through their process, but have some sort of guidance, some sort of coaching that doesn't require a one-on-one all the time. Not saying that it's probably not a good idea to have some sort of coaching mentoring relationship at some point, but the advent of these AI-driven tools are going to open that up even greater, to give the learner more autonomy, because they're getting the kind of real-time feedback that they require. And as I bring up this next bit of research that we did, let's talk a little bit about these. We in our upskilling, reskilling study asked companies, what kind of a role, how important is AI and other sort of advanced data analysis? What big of a role, how important is it to the personalization of learning? And you can see most companies find that, yeah, that's a critical piece of it, right? I mean, in order to do the kind of things that Amit and I were talking about, and doing it at a scale that will work for the enterprise, there has to be some level of this going on. And for a lot of organizations, you probably don't even have to think about it, right? This isn't, okay, now you have to take your notes and go out and do an AI technology selection. That's not how this works. You don't buy an AI. What you're doing is trying to look for tools that have this built in, baked in, to help you do the things that you want to do at scale. So the idea that, okay, I have all of the information that we need about a particular topic, and I know what I know about this learner and where they're at, and I can use natural language processing to parse a question that they ask. So now the bot can say, I know what you're asking, and I can point you in the right direction. Far greater level of autonomy than we're able to provide without that. But so you talk a little bit, because I know that that's something that you guys are passionate about, is the machine learning element of all this. And I think the buy side, the enterprise, sometimes gets a little confused by it, getting wrapped up in the differences between AI and machine learning. What is it, what isn't it, and how it works. But this is something you work on a lot. So let's talk about how that plays a role in all this.
Sure. So I think for us, when we look at AI in the learning ecosystem, our primary focus is right now on helping learners through that piece of technology. So so whatever we have built into our system, it tries to recognize the place of a learner within the environment, within the company, in terms of their profile, their skills, and also recognizes their team members, who their team members are, what their roles are, and tries to match these factors together in some algorithm. And then it understands that, okay, if it tries to correlate what you're doing right now as a learner, and then it tries to kind of suggest and recommend that what other things would be relevant for you for your learning journey. So if I'm doing a particular piece of learning, and and then it tries to match it with my skill set, my role requirements, my future role requirements, also what my peers are doing in my team, what other people are doing in the company, and also matches with the let's say as simple as course popularity, or which is which courses are being taken more aggressively and they are being completed more rapidly. So it kind of gives you very relevant pieces of let's say learning experiences or tools or courses, which either are valid for your role or skills, or are very effective with other people. So I think what it does is it takes away the load of thinking and doing all of this by manually by the admins. So admins don't have to sift through a lot of data. Okay, I learned the reports. Okay, these courses are not really popular. Let's not use them anymore. So it takes away a lot of manual time of the admins, which today in today's world actually is not available. They don't have the time to just look at everybody. And if you have a company, let's say 10,000 people, it is unimaginable that somebody can actually do this and bring sense to that data in real time. If they have all the time, they could do that, but not in real time. So the systems, that's where I think the AI really comes in. It can do all of these things much faster and much more accurately. And also, as the data builds up, it actually becomes more effective in what it is doing. And I think you said it at one point in time. This is about patience. You don't implement an AI system and get something on day one. It has to build, it has to learn a lot of things from your, the data. So I think, but yes, as with time, the data becomes really helpful and meaningful for the AI engine to work on, and that's when it really starts giving you good results. And things like chatbots, and this is what you've seen. I think there is a tendency of the learners now not willing to talk to a lot of people for anything. They want to go to a system and say, okay, can you do this for me? Can you find me this? Can you, do you have this? So they want to talk to the system and evaluate and review what is available as an option. So I think that's, and if it is NLP driven, it is easier for them because they don't have to do a very fixed kind of a mapping. So they can actually freely write something and it'll give a good result. And again, that also needs to learn. More the employees in the company, it has to learn better. It has to train itself multiple times. So that's where it comes in. And I think machine learning is a component in the entire piece which helps the component learn on its own. You could have an AI engine without the machine learning part. You could train it manually based on the results, but that's a different discussion altogether. But yes, I think the AI, both in the chatbots with NLP and both in the engine for recommendations, that is really effective.
Yeah. And you're so right about, the idea of the patience piece, right? We bring that back because if you take 3 months worth of data and this one event happens only one time during those 3 months, it's an anomaly, right? But then if you take a year's worth of data and it turns out it happens every quarter at the same time, it's a pattern. So, that's how machine learning and artificial intelligence works. It can only analyze what you've given it. So you have patience and things will grow smarter and better and more accurate over time for sure. So, as we look through, this is results from our study around the personalization of learning, the things that lead to more learner autonomy. We looked at companies that said that they were doing a good job with personalization, as well as companies that said that they felt that their learning approaches were preparing them for the future of work versus those that said that maybe not so much. And these things came out, surfaced up as things that were very positive as far as moving towards personalization. So, aligning learning with the personal and professional goals of learners, and then also getting frequent feedback from those coaches and mentors on their learning progression. So you can't have autonomy without that. People need to have direction. They need to know how they're doing. So making sure that there's an ability to do that. Recognizing and rewarding people for learning, that's going to help keep them going. And that can be anything from points to badges to actual rewards or just social recognition, whatever it happens to be, but something that continues to pull the learner along and encourages them to continue that sort of self-driven journey. Learning, being rated by other learners, that helps with that sort of recommendation engine. It helps people find things that make sense to them based on, their peers and what their peers are learning. Understanding what the digital prowess is of the learners, right? We talk about all these things, and let's say you go back to the idea of using the mobile device, but if it turns out that in your particular group that you're trying to train, it turns out they don't want to or won't use their mobile devices for things, well, then don't build a mobile program for them and force it on them, right? Understand what your audience's needs are. That's a big part of it. It goes back to the beginning of that duality of personalization and autonomy, which the second piece of it is in a time, modality, format that makes sense for me. So the idea is not forcing it because you're just recreating the original problem with a new format or a new modality. And then it can, customize cadence. Some people need things to happen, need refreshers to happen more often, and that can be picked up through analyzing how they're performing on the job, how they're performing in the learning, taking that information in, knowing how frequently you need to reach out to these learners on these things. And of course, multiple languages and dialects, something that kind of, I think, gets forgotten sometimes. Obviously, for organizations that are very centric to one geography, they don't think about it much. But as the world becomes more interconnected, very important to think about that. What are your geographical requirements moving forward? So with that, as we head near the latter part of this, before we get into some examples that you've brought of companies that are doing these things, we wanted to ask the group a quick question and just see what you thought of. What do you think learners will have more control of? What can they, if learners have more control over their own learning, what things could they do better? And you can select any of these, obviously. So I'll go ahead and I'll launch this poll. It should pop up for folks, and then you can take a look at that. So let's see. And as people are participating in that poll, I'm going to take a quick look at some of the questions. But And Sakdeva says, and you can tell me if you see this, Amit, but saying that they're still focused on behavioral training, but with the pandemic now, technical and functional trainings are a priority too. That's an interesting observation. I'll say something here that in our research, we've seen this hyper focus on what was traditionally considered soft skills, right? So emotional intelligence, collaboration, empathy, things that maybe weren't so high on the list previously, but in this current environment, when there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of changes, organizations were looking to develop a lot of these softer skills, which I think they're starting to look at as more critical because they're applicable in any environment, in any role. So I don't know, that's, taking that question, Amit, do you see a more focus on one or the other, or is it both?
I think the priority has now it is so let me put it this way, that what we have now seen is that in the last 18 months since the pandemic began, we have seen almost every company had a higher priority on the employees' well-being, their mental well-being, and also that the security and safety primarily. That led to the companies understanding that the employees need to be kind of almost felt assured of their future, number one, and also assured that they are more important than the work or the business or the numbers at any point in time. I think those two factors led to the situation where there's a lot of focus right now, and I think it is higher than before. A lot of focus are right now on the empathy or the EQ part, or just the collaboration part or the communication part. And I think it is higher right now. It might reduce a little bit as we become more adjusted to the situation, but we have seen that in the last 18 months, more emphasis has been on what we call soft skills, but with priority for mental well-being and also the emotional intelligence part.
Mm-hmm. And so we're looking at the results of the poll here, Amit. And so I think 52% of those that participated said it's all of the above, right? They would think that those, and so I would assume that that's your take on this as well. That these are the things that we think that learners should be able to do if we're able to give them higher levels of autonomy. Correct?
Absolutely. I think one leads to the other. So if you're able to do one of these tasks, eventually all of the other would also fall in line. So yes, all of the above would definitely come out. And I think the primary driver being the ownership over the learning. When they feel more in control of their own learning, they will tend to do their jobs better. They will be more engaged as an employee, as a learner. So yes, I would say this is a true reflection of what we have seen.
Yep. So I'm going to let you get into some examples of how organizations are doing some of this stuff. So customers that you work with.
Sure. Could you bring up all the points for this customer?
Sure.
I think just because we're short of time, I just take it through. So I think this one relates more to the delivery medium, or how the learners or the companies are looking at delivering learning. So the customer is kind of not a very new startup. It's been there for 6-7 years, maybe more now, and they're one of the India's top 3 used car buying platform. A technology-driven company, and I think before pandemic they were doing all the usual stuff. They still had a lot of classroom training going on, but as the pandemic I think struck, what changed for them is that their majority of the workforce is actually already remote in their branches or in their regional offices. But the demand for learning over mobile increased because the learners, that's what their preference was. So we found that at least for this customer, the demand for learning was driven by the learner. That more and more people were looking to learn on mobile devices, which also led to shorter formats. And they don't want to do a lot of long courses on the mobile. They want to do quick learning, videos, very quick programs, shorter formats for that. So I think that for this customer, we did see that the change in how the customer wants to look at the learning ecosystem was driven by learners' demand of mobile devices being the first medium of delivery, and than the shorter formats of the learning experiences. So that's what I think we did observe in this, and this is a shift from what they were doing before the pandemic did kind of happen. So one good example of how things change immediately once situation changed. And this one is very close to what you mentioned about the language and the dialects. And I did not mention the point here, but this customer in fact set up their own studio to translate everything they deliver to the learners in at least I think 7 languages, regional Indian languages, because their workforce is rural, their turnover is pretty high, and so they have to keep training a lot of people in many languages, and their customer experience depends entirely on how good the learners have learned, their core information or their core technology, and they use the dialects and the languages, regional languages, very very strongly for that. And so again, for them the challenge was the fast attrition, so they have to keep skilling people again and again on the same thing, and their technology still was changing, the what they were using for their customers, so they have to keep upskilling their learners who are also changing very rapidly. So for them, I think mobile devices became a primary source of learning, and along with that their high focus on languages, regional languages, what I think did help them make the learning more effective. So they did see a drop in attrition once the learning became more relevant for the learner, because they came from rural areas where they did not have English as primary language, so they could not half of the time understand what they want to talk to the customer about. But with the focus, they actually invested. The company has a good studio in their main office where they translate everything into about 7 languages. That was a something they did, and and I think again because the workforce is very busy with the actual business, so they also have this mobile first and on demand philosophy behind how they want the learners to learn.
That's great.
Again, I'm just rushing through these because we are short of time. But yes, these are really interesting examples. There's a lot of things which they've been doing, but yeah, so we've been fortunate to be a part of their journey so far and see how they've evolved over time. And I think these are really reflections of what we've been talking in the entire session today. How things have changed, and they may not even go back to the situation they were before. So these, especially these two customers, they will never go back to the classroom training environment to the same extent. Maybe 5-10%, but may not not to the same extent they used to earlier than that.
Yeah. All right. And so, yeah, as you mentioned, we are running up near the end here. So I'll just let these sort of populate the takeaways. But, the idea that this idea of self-directed learning is the new given. We need more on-demand search, and AI-driven personalized learning, more recommendations around the learning experiences, short format, right? So in the flow of work, not adding to fatigue. And of course, the learner autonomy, accountability, and responsibility. The more there is of that, the more effective the learning will be. And look, let's not kid ourselves, right? We know that you can't apply that the entire organization is going to behave the same way and react the same way. Not everyone is going to be as eager a self-learner as everyone else, right? There's going to be different levels. So the idea is, if you're going to do anything, taking a sort of one-size-fits-all approach, why wouldn't you want to give those people who are more apt to do self-learning or take that autonomy, why wouldn't you give it to them, right? As opposed to saying, well, not everyone's doing that, so we won't. Yeah. I think it's giving them the opportunity to do that is what's going to really drive the effectiveness of the learning, is giving people the opportunity to learn at a pace that makes sense for them, right?
No, I totally agree, David. I think companies are now looking at employees being employees first and learners next. So while yes, learning is important for everybody in the company, but employees' well-being and their engagement with the company, given the new environment, I think every company is right now very conscious of the fact that employees are going through a lot of challenging situations. They're doing and these things are common now. People are ending up doing more work at home or remotely than they were doing in office. The burnouts are real, the fatigues are real. I think these things have to be factored first, even before learning comes in. And so if these are factored in, then learning experiences will become much better anyways. But yeah, and then after that, yes, there has to be a lot of focus on how each learner would learn. Like you said, some people might want to learn through virtual classroom, some might want to learn through mobile devices. So I think there's a lot of moving variables right now here. And it's going to be really interesting next few years to see how we are able to adapt to these situations and what experiences we can bring to the learners. And there is a lot of experimentation going to happen now. We will try AR, VR, AI, multiple things, and I think some of them will succeed with some kind of companies, some kind of people, some kind of learners, some kind of groups. So we'll have to keep experimenting and seeing what really works best for the people.
Yeah. And I'll say there's a lot of talk now, again, there's a big focus on becoming a learning focused organization or having a learning culture or growing a learning culture. And unless you change the way you're doing things and start doing some of the things that we've been talking about, that won't happen. There's a reason why it hasn't happened. And you need to be able to empower learners to do these things, or else there won't be a culture of learning in the organization. So we answered a lot of the questions that came in as we were going on it. But there is one that I wanted to get to here. Let's see real quick, I'm sorry. A question about standalone assessments. So Amit, do you think we'll see more standalone assessments, meaning taking an approach that organizations care less about how you learn and more about what you have learned and how you use this knowledge in your work?
I think it's already happening to a large extent. It is going to grow because I think, and it goes back to the same autonomy, where if you're making a learner accountable and empowered for their own learning, they do not really have a motivation to play with the system or the outcome. They will learn for their own objectives and for their own improvement. So assessments will only help them learn. And if you remove the the burden of an outcome of an assessment, which is not linked to a recognition or a performance award or a reward, let's say it's not an assessment which can lead to a certification or a promotion. I think the incentive for the learner to use assessment as a learning tool is more and higher. So I would say, making learners more accountable will actually make them more, truthful to what they're doing. So standalone assessment is going to only increase as a use in the future.
Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate everyone participating and asking the questions and taking part in the poll, and of course, spending your time with us today. Amit, thank you so much for bringing your insights and your examples to everyone for them to share. And of course, thank you to UpsideLMS for providing the hour and your time. So Amit, great to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Thank you.